The year is 1636. The Dutch Republic was experiencing the richest period in its history, and all of this wealth was transforming the streets of Amsterdam. New canal houses were rising, expensive fabrics were being sold in narrow streets, new banks were opening across the city. As trade expanded, new fortunes appeared, and people no longer wanted to become rich only through hard work. They wanted to rise faster, because it seemed like everyone around them was changing their lives. Some merchants were reaching unimaginable fortunes within just a few years. Some began living in houses they could never have dreamed of before. And during times like these, the psychology of society begins to change. People start believing that normal paths are too slow. They search for faster ways to become rich, and this was exactly the environment where tulips became important. Tulips did not belong to Holland. Their origins traced back to the Ottoman Empire. Tulips held a special place in Ottoman palaces. They appeared in poetry, were carefully cultivated in gardens, and were seen as symbols of elegance. When they reached Europe in the 16th century, people were fascinated by them, because they looked completely different from most European flowers. Some varieties had red streaks, others developed purple patterns, some seemed to burn with flame-like colours. Today we know this was caused by something called the tulip-breaking virus, but in the 1600s people saw it as perfection created by nature, and the rarest varieties quickly began attracting enormous attention. At first, tulips existed only in the gardens of the wealthy. They were status symbols, because during that era, being rich was not only about having money. Wealth had to be visible. Some merchants deliberately guided guests through their gardens, because owning a rare tulip was like owning an expensive painting. In some cases, it was even more impressive, because it was alive, rare, and owned by only a few people. Some collectors searched only for varieties nobody else possessed, because people often desire not what is beautiful, but what is rare. And as rarity increases, price rises with it. But then, something began to change. People were no longer discussing the beauty of flowers, they were discussing prices. Around 1634, tulip prices began rising rapidly. By 1635, some rare varieties were selling for hundreds of guilders. At the time, the average annual salary of an ordinary worker was around 200 guilders. But some tulips had already reached 10 times that amount. Especially a variety called Semper Augustus had become almost legendary. According to some records, a single Semper Augustus bulb reached prices between 5,000 and 10,000 guilders. With that amount of money, someone could purchase a luxurious canal house in Amsterdam. In some areas, even several houses. And most people no longer even wanted to see the flowers themselves. They were following price movements. Because as prices increased, more people entered the market. And as more people entered the market, prices rose again. This psychological cycle became stronger and stronger. Some people held a tulip bulb for only a few days, then sold it for a higher price. Then someone else sold it again for even more, and the system kept expanding. By 1636, people were no longer even buying physical tulips. Contracts were being written for tulips that had not yet been planted. This system later became known as wind handle, or wind trade, because people were not buying a real product, they were buying expectations. Some deals were made inside taverns. People signed contracts at tables, small pieces of paper changed hands, and people believed they were becoming wealthy within minutes. Some merchants had already begun neglecting their real businesses. Because ordinary trade now seemed slow, money that normally required years of work seemed to be earned within days. And this started changing the psychology of the city itself. Some people could no longer sleep at night because they constantly thought about the opportunities they were missing. Some woke up every morning and immediately asked for tulip prices. Others stopped caring about almost everything else. The same stories spread throughout the city. People spoke about a man who had become incredibly rich within months. Another person supposedly changed his entire life with a single trade, and the more people heard stories like these, the more they believed in the system. Because humans often follow the behavior of the crowd around them, especially when everyone is moving in the same direction. And that was exactly what was happening in Amsterdam. The city had entered an invisible race. Who would become rich first? Who would find the right tulip variety? Who would completely change their life within months? Some young merchants began dreaming about owning ships. Some imagined themselves living like aristocrats. Some families talked about larger houses. Others believed the future of their children would change forever. And all of those dreams depended on one thing: prices continuing to rise. Some people started borrowing money. Some mortgaged their homes. Some sold the possessions they already owned. Because when prices rise continuously, risk can become invisible. People begin seeing only the upward movement, and the longer the rise continues, the stronger people's trust in the system becomes. Inside certain taverns, people discussed nothing except tulips. Price lists moved from table to table. Some merchants proudly described the deals they had made. Some had already begun spending profits they had not even earned yet, because most people had become convinced prices would rise forever. And that is the most powerful aspect of economic bubbles. They make people feel like a new era has begun. They convince people that old rules no longer apply. People begin believing they are among the first to see the future, and that feeling pushes the market even higher. In some parts of Amsterdam, normal trade conversations disappeared completely. Spice prices, new trade routes, shipping agreements, all of them were replaced by tulip prices. Some discussed the rare varieties they owned. Others predicted prices would climb even further within weeks, and the excitement across the city became almost physically visible. Because economic manias do not only change markets, they also change the atmosphere of entire cities, the way people speak, the way they dream, and the way they imagine the future. Some families even began raising their children differently, because they believed they would soon possess enormous wealth. Some hired new servants, some bought more expensive clothing, others started living based on money they had not yet earned. Because during boom periods, people begin treating future profits as if they already exist, and that makes the system even more fragile. Because expectations begin mixing with reality. According to some historians, a large portion of the trades during tulip mania were purely speculative. People were buying tulips not to use them, but to sell them later at higher prices. That meant the system constantly required new buyers. As new people entered, prices rose. And as prices rose, even more people entered. The cycle fed itself. But no mania in history lasts forever. In February 1637, something unexpected happened during a small auction. The seller expected high offers, but the room remained silent. Nobody bid. At first, it seemed like a small detail, but soon other sales also began failing, and for the first time people felt fear, because the entire system depended on one thing: belief. People believed prices would continue rising, and because of that belief, the system worked. But once people began doubting, everything changed. Some investors tried selling their contracts, but finding buyers had become difficult because everyone wanted to leave at the exact same moment. And markets collapse very quickly during moments like that. Some tulip prices fell by more than 90% within weeks. Tulips that were once considered worth fortunes became nearly worthless. Some people lost their entire savings. Some were crushed under enormous debts. Some families needed years to recover. Some never dared invest again for the rest of their lives. Because economic crashes do not only destroy money, they also destroy trust. Taverns that were once crowded became silent. People no longer talked about dreams of wealth, they talked about losses. Some tried denying the agreements they had signed. Some could not repay their debts. Others still believed the collapse was temporary, because humans struggle to accept massive losses, especially when those losses were caused by their own decisions. But the illusion had shattered, and for the first time people realized something. For a while, the entire city had been living inside the same dream. And perhaps that was the most fascinating part of all, because this was not only an economic collapse, it was a massive demonstration of human psychology. Because sometimes people do not buy real value, they buy each other's beliefs. And when enough people believe the same story, reality itself can begin to feel distorted. But eventually the real world returns, and expectations collide with reality. What is interesting is that the Netherlands did not completely collapse. Ships continued entering ports, trade continued, the city continued living, only the dreams collapsed. And that is why tulip mania has never been forgotten. Because this story is not only about tulips, it is about human nature. And throughout history, the same cycle has repeated again and again. the South Sea Bubble in the 1700s, railway mania in the 1800s, the 1929 stock market crash, the dot-com bubble of the 1990s, the 2008 housing crisis, the rise of cryptocurrencies, and in the future there will probably be new examples as well. Because technology may change, markets may change, but human psychology often remains the same. People become obsessed with rapid rises. They believe stories about easy wealth, and if everyone around them is doing the same thing, risk begins to feel normal. Maybe that is why tulip mania is still discussed today, because the issue was never only about tulips. The issue is what people were capable of believing, and sometimes prices do not rise because people truly value something. Sometimes people begin valuing something simply because the price is rising, and perhaps the most dangerous economic moments in history begin exactly like that. When people stop seeing real value and begin seeing only the rise. If you enjoy these kinds of real economic stories, the strangest investment manias in history, and how human psychology can reshape entire economies, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because sometimes the most fascinating stories in history are not born from wars, but from the dreams people tell each other.